Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here. Locked On Big 12 podcast. Today it is the 3rd of May, 2022. I am back home, back with the rig as well after my time in the Midwest. Fun show coming up for you all today. We're going to talk about the recent news, an article from Dennis Dodd over at CBS Sports titled Big 12 Split into Divisions on hold as NCAA proposal aims to remove conference title games restrictions. We'll get into all of that and more, a touch of transfer portal news as well coming up on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Josh Neighbors here. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at LO Big 12. You guys can find the show wherever you guys get your podcasts and here on YouTube as well. Make sure you guys subscribe, leave ratings, all that stuff, thumbs up. It all really does help. Podcast has been growing a lot lately. I appreciate all of your all's interactions, comments, all that stuff. It is really, really appreciated here as we hit the true off season for at least college football and college basketball. Obviously, Diamond Sports and more still happening. But big news on today's show. Put the glasses on to read this article. Not sure if you guys saw it. If not, go check it out at cbssports.com. Dennis Dodd, who's excellent always, was the author. He says Big 12 split into divisions on hold as NCAA proposal aims to remove conference title game restrictions. It goes on to say basically, as the Big 12 was considering a temporary split into divisions for football, sources tell CBS Sports an NCAA proposal to relax conference championship games rules has complicated matters. That proposal would no longer require FBS conferences to have divisions in order to hold league title games, effectively giving such conferences better access to the college football playoff by allowing them to match their two best teams. Now, right now, the Big 12 does not have divisions because they have a 10-team league, and obviously have gone through some realignments. That's right now why they don't have those divisions. But a Big 12 subcommittee formed to determine how best to incorporate up to 14 teams in conference realignment from 2023 through 2024. It's been expected to be finalized with the league composition and the schedules this week. So, we expected to see some resolution. This article is from May 1, 2 days ago. So this now, has thrown a big wrench into things. We were supposed to get the announcement of divisions. We're supposed to get the announcement of a schedule, and we're not going to get that right now because we're still waiting for the NCAA. And it says, however, the Big 12 is awaiting resolution on a proposal from the NCAA Football Oversight Committee that would allow all leagues to play without divisions but still hold conference championship games without a waiver from the association. That would give conferences the opportunity to match their two best teams, usually highest ranked, in teams in league title games. Legislation would be an option, not a mandate. Currently, the only FBS conferences that play without divisions are the 10-team Big 12 and the American. And so this is something that the Big 12 has been working on for a while. Somebody that just says a source familiar with the process, the Big 12 process, told CBS Sports, quote, "You're basically starting the scheduling process from scratch." So a couple of things here. Let's just take a second to think. All right. So they want to go with divisions, something that we've talked about on the show. They would prefer to go with divisions in a 14-team league. That makes a lot of sense, right? Especially, with the transition. You always say, well, just leave them all together until Oklahoma and Texas leave. No, they want to go to divisions at least for, that time, and then obviously kind of reset once things change. And I think the Big 12's big problem is they've been working on this for a while. Scheduling is not easy. Scheduling is complicated. It's a puzzle, right? Especially college football games, putting that together is a bit of a puzzle, especially in a 14-team league when not everybody is going to play everybody. That becomes a bit more of a challenge. In a 10-team league, when you're playing a 9-game conference schedule like the Big 12 is now, it really is not that hard because you're playing everybody once, and on a 2-year scale, you're playing everybody in each location, you're flip-flopping. It does make things easier. It's pretty clean, actually, the way the Big 12 has it right now. I know that with 10 teams, they'd obviously like to have more. It's why they're going to add some more. But it makes things pretty easy, pretty clean when you've got the 9 and you're just flip-flopping. So back to the gym, got to have some water there. So this has put a wrench really into the Big 12's plans because, as you all know, or if you don't know, the Big 12, it seems like, is going to have UCF, BYU, Cincinnati, and Houston all in the league by 2023-2024. That's next season. And Oklahoma and Texas are scheduled to leave after the 2025 season. So it sounds like at this point in time, we're looking at potentially a 14-team league in 23-24 and 24-25, shifting down to 12 once OU and Texas leave after that 2025 season. And once again, we had discussed the way you flip-flop divisions right now. Now, I actually like the fact that Big 12 gets to play everybody. Right now, at least, that's the one thing is that you're playing everybody home and away every other year. And when you think about the pros and the cons of divisions, that is one of the things that gets that does is a con, right? I think there's a lot of pros, to having the non-divisions, but I would say one of the pros of having divisions, like you keep the rivals together, right? In a 14-team league, there's a bit more cycling that is going on if you're going to go non-divisions, right? There's going to be a lot more cycling. It's going to be going on. So you kind of had a tough time keeping the rivalries together. Once again, the Big 12 at 10 teams right now is very lucky. I think when we discuss the pros right now, think about the fact that the Big 12 championship game is usually going to be the two best teams in the league. Oklahoma State and Baylor this year, they proved to do that. They both beat OU, who was the third place team. They both beat Iowa. Oklahoma State probably should have beaten Iowa State, who's a fourth place team, so on. And so we did get the two best teams. You go to leagues sometimes, and I'll give you guys an example last year, like the Big Ten, where Michigan was 8-1, Ohio State was 8-1, and Michigan State was 7-2. Those all three teams were in the top 10 or around the top 10. They finished 12-2, 11-2, and 11-2. But Michigan ends up playing Iowa from the Big Ten West, who was 10-4. Not to say the Big Ten West wasn't good last year, but when you've got Michigan State, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State all in the same division, well, it just kind of shows you most seasons that's going to be the better of the two divisions. And so that's why that if you had played a Big 10, title game last year in the format right now that the Big 12 has, or the one that's being proposed with division less, it would make it, you're going to get those two top teams. All right. So what I'm trying to say with a lot of this, guys, is that I'm actually in favor. I'm in favor of division less. I like that. Now, right now the ideas being proposed are all, as I have my alarm go off, are all about, the Big 12, at least, they want to organize this 14-team league. That's what they're trying to do. I think when you're thinking about all of this shifting, that's why they want to have two divisions. They can just split up, and then they'll obviously have a plan for the split of OU and Texas when it comes. I think just the Big 12 frustration right now is that organizational shakeup that they might be facing. They don't want the NCAA to put this thing on hold because right now they're really close to figuring out what they want to do. With those splitting divisions, with who's going to be playing where, when, it just makes things a lot easier for them, which I completely understand. I totally understand that. Once again, I do think in general that the division model might not always give you the best results. I think in the Big 12, it's going to be a bit more even just because teams feel a lot more even. But generally speaking, I think the non-division way is the way to go. I think it was a fun exercise to do last week. I think the Big 12, for organizational purposes, at least for the time being, should explore these divisions and see what it does for them. But in the end, I really do like the non-divisional look, just because I do think it gives you the two best teams. Now you might say, well, there are some exceptions. I agree with that, because in a 12-team league, if you're going to go with, if you're going to go with the non-divisional route, well, yeah, you're going to have a situation where you're not playing everybody every year. So maybe you do avoid some of the best teams. So while your record might be sterling, there's a chance that you could avoid, if you're playing a 9-team conference schedule and, there's 11 other options, ostensibly you could avoid the two best teams in your league. It could happen. It would be difficult. It'd be quite happenstance if it did go that way. Or maybe one, depending on how things cycle with rivalries and whatnot. I'm sure they would keep some games the same, right? If there's 1 or 2 games you keep the same, then obviously you're cycling through a different group. So, maybe you would only miss one of the best teams in the league. So there's a fair argument there, but I don't know if it's too much of a leg to stand on to make me think. I just think last year, like, you look at the 2 best teams in the Big Ten, it was definitely Ohio State and Michigan. Now, another counter to this, kind of we're going through all these things right now just as they're happening. Another counter to this as well, you might end up with the back-to-back game situation, right? Ohio State played Michigan last week of the season, as they always do. They would end up playing them the following week in the Big Ten championship game. Fair point. You might end up with some rematches. That could definitely happen. That's kind of the nice thing about some rivalry games that you play in division. A lot of these rivalry games that are played most of the time are in division, right? Auburn versus Alabama in division. The Egg Bowl is in division between Ole Miss and Mississippi State. You do have some crossovers that are, in the end, but like Iowa, Nebraska is in division. Virginia Tech, Virginia in division. And so when you go the non-divisional route, you do run the risk of potentially having to replay a game. That's why we talked about it last year. We could have gotten Bedlam round 2. That was a possibility. And so if you do rid divisions and you maintain rivalries on the last week, you might run the risk of rematches. That's a real possibility. I think that's more of the issue I would worry about, as opposed to the one I just had, where you might not play the best team, because in the end you'd actually have to play the best team, right? So, just for example, let's just say Kansas misses Oklahoma State one year and is able to run the table, in the new Big 12. And well, at the end of the day, they'd actually have to play Oklahoma State in the end, right? If Oklahoma State was the best team in the league that year, they'd have to play them in the end of the day. So you'd actually get that. Eventually, maybe not during the course of the regular season, but you'd eventually get that. Then when you think about what I just mentioned with the rivalries and the replays, that one, obviously, as I just said, it feels much more real. Michigan, Ohio State, you would have had to do again. There was a chance that we saw once, as I mentioned before, we could have seen Bedlam, once again in the situation that I had mentioned last year. Not something that happens a ton. It's not something that we always see occur. But a possibility that we have to entertain nonetheless. So I think that was worth mentioning. Sometimes it ends up clean with divisions. For example, last year with Pitt and Wake Forest, it ended up pretty clean, right? With Wake at 7-1 and Pitt was 7-1, and then we're trying to think about what else. In the Pac-12, it ended up clean, right? Oregon versus Utah, but still there is a bit of seclusion, because your most of your conference games, the majority of them, are you playing teams from your division. So that's just something that is worth noting, right? But you do, in the case of the Pac-12, you do end up playing a good deal of teams from the opposite division as well. So there is some overlap, but divisions can yield the best 2 teams. Once again, I just mentioned some of those examples. We got the right teams playing. Georgia, Alabama, obviously. We got the right 2 teams playing. And then you have examples like last year, Iowa versus Michigan, when Michigan versus Ohio State would have been the better game, but also you might say, wow, Michigan's got to beat Ohio State back-to-back weeks. That feels a bit difficult. It feels a bit unfair in some ways. Now, I would say that's totally fair too. One thing also I think people believe with the non-divisional route, it might give you a better chance at the college football playoff. Now, if it expands, excuse me, like it should, and I think it will eventually expand, you're gonna lose some of that, right? You will eventually lose a little bit of that. And so the feeling of being left out might go away a bit, but as long as it's 4, yeah, I mean, I think the non-divisional route, much like we saw last year, and gave the Big 12 the best shot at the college football playoff, and it gave Houston and Cincinnati the best shot at it too, with Cincinnati playing there in the championship game, obviously, but. Who knows if Baylor, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State were all in the same division last year, maybe you could have ended up a situation, where you played somebody on the other side who wasn't good enough. And I know it's happened in the past. I think a few years ago, like UCLA was around 6-6 and got in the Pac-12 title game. I know Georgia Tech has been at a year. I think they were 8-4 maybe, or somewhere in that range. They got in the ACC title game. I'm forgetting now, but those situations can happen. And also as a title game, really, you're not putting your best foot forward in that sense. You're not making as much of a statement as possible. You're not giving yourself as many opportunities as possible as well. So it's something to consider here. I'm for Big 12 divisions in the sense that it's going to help organize a conference that is changing. That makes sense to me. That says, okay, for right now, just so we can figure out scheduling, these teams go here. And then once things change, maybe they reconsider and leave out the divisions once the conference is a bit more set. But having you go here, you go here, you go here, you go here, you go here is easier because it doesn't mess with the scheduling as much, right? If you're adding and subtracting teams, the groups that you're supposed to play next, you kind of always move along in the schedule. You're next. Okay, you're next season. We left you out this year. We're back to you next year. That gets thrown off if you add and subtract teams. Like things get bumped. You might miss a team twice, or something. You might not travel to a place you should be traveling to. It would get moved around. The divisions just makes it simpler. You say, okay, you've been added to this division. That's a conference game. It's a division game there. Okay, you've been added to this division. It just makes things a bit more clean in terms of the separation. But once again, we'll see a lot could change in this respect, just thinking about those ideas out loud. But it's kind of exciting to see what happens. I wanted to see those divisions. We all wanted to see what those divisions were going to look like and kind of the scheduling possibilities as well, at least for 2023 and 2024. That's on hold right now. We'll see what happens with the NCAA and if things change about what we're seeing right now. All right, one quick word from our sponsors, then we'll talk some transfer portal news as it pertains to the University of Texas. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline and BetOnline.net. You guys can go to BetOnline today. When you guys do, you guys will find the best, all kinds of odds for all kinds of things, whether it's college football futures, NFL draft for next year futures. They had some of those last year. NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs. All of those things are available at BetOnline and BetOnline.net. You go there today. Once again, easy to sign up. It's free to do as well. Bet Online, it's where the game starts. All right, so there was some news from the weekend on the transfer portal. Texas almost lost a top player last year in the transfer portal. This is from Chris Hummer. It says, anxious transfer portal week sees Texas Longhorns fend off suitor for superstar wide receiver Xavier Worthy. It says 72 hours prior to the effective closing of the NCAA's transfer portal, they're tumultuous in college football circles. He talks about Jordan Addison and his flirtations right now that are going on. And then now you're hearing, so they're getting news that Xavier Worthy had a significant 6-figure offer from at least one Power 5 school to enter the portal and attend their program. But Jeff Howe from 24/7 was told, he's not leaving. That's not going to happen. But Worthy caught 62 passes for 981 and 12 touchdowns last year. You guys have heard me. I basically count him as a 1,000-yard wide receiver. Some of the quarterback play was more consistent. He 110% would have been a 1,000-yard wide receiver, but he was not able to due to, once again, QB play that was pretty inconsistent. So this was pretty surprising news. I mean, I feel like, I know there's some great offensive places to go, but when somebody comes calling you with a $600,000 offer, you should definitely listen. Yeah. But Steve Sarkisian is going to put you in a good position to win. I'm sure Texas has got the resources to keep him there. I just feel like Sarkisian, with how well he used him as a freshman, and now with Quinn Ewers in the fold, is going to make sure that Xavier Worthy gets his touches. I know it's a crowded wide receiver room, but in terms of talent, he's the best one there, I think, in my opinion. I think he is a future superstar, not just in this league, but I think in the league above, the National Football League. He's got that kind of potential. So when you're seeing stories like this, it does it does make you think about the state of college football and what's going on right now. We'll touch on this more tonight in our show. We usually do a round table, and that will be coming later on tonight. All right, so that will do it for today's show. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. It's at LO Big 12. You guys can follow me at Josh Neighbors _. Also want to mention O'Shawn Mathis ends up picking Nebraska as opposed to going to Texas, which was I think a very interesting choice. They must have dropped the bag for him. Just mentioned that there. Find us wherever you guys get your podcast and on YouTube as well. Till next time, my friends, as always, stay safe.